Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Azure Migration Simplified, AI-powered planning and execution with Dr. Migrate. We're glad you could spend part of your afternoon with us. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. Today's session is scheduled for 1 hour and we'll leave time for questions at the end. You can submit your questions at any time using the chat or Q&A panel, and we'll address as many as we can. Also, please note, today's session will be recorded and will be made available following the presentation. Today's webinar is focused on how public sector and education organizations can simplify and accelerate Azure migrations using AI-assisted planning and execution. You'll see how Dr. Migrate combined with Azure Accelerate helps reduce manual effort, identify cost savings and risk, and generate executive-ready migration insights, all while being supported, secure, compliant, AI-ready cloud adoption. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Jason Griffith, Director of Cloud Services at Planet Technologies. Jason will walk us through the platform and share practical insights into how organizations are approaching Azure migration planning in a faster, more streamlined way. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason. Jason, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thanks, Casey, and thank you all for taking the time today. So, real quick, just a little bit about Planet. We're a leading provider of Microsoft professional services, and what makes us really qualified to have this conversation today is we've worked with a number of customers to plan, migrate their existing infrastructure to Azure. And we've earned advanced specializations from Microsoft that not only validates the work that we've done, we've had to go through audits on work that we have completed through evaluation of our statement of works, our progress, our process through how we take customers through this transition. And what we're really excited to show today is a new tool that's become available called Dr. Migrate, which helps facilitate the planning and the decision-making to move assets that exist in an on-prem or a colo to Azure and what those steps and activities are. And so from an agenda today, we're going to talk about why customers are choosing to migrate. We're going to talk about the legacy tools for a little bit to understand the difference between what Dr. Migrate does today, where it provides some of the unique benefits, and over the previous tools. And then we'll even walk through an example migration scenario of a fictitious customer that has X number of assets, but it's mostly to understand the reporting and the data that is provided that helps you make informed decisions of what and how you need to migrate your assets into Azure. And then we'll conclude talking about a special offer that's available. So, this could be considered a priority in terms of how customers are making the decision today to migrate. A lot of it does stem from the surprise Broadcom price increases if you're running VMware. And it's, that's where the initial conversation starts. But also if you're considering a hardware refresh, a data center exit, considering application data modernization, whether you want to move from infrastructure hosted applications to leveraging Azure platform services or SQL platform services, and to reduce your infrastructure. And then also, slowly gaining steam is how do we get our data and our applications closer to the AI models and the AI advancements that are occurring at a rapid pace through Azure and those very different capabilities. So for many customers, the significant, I don't want to say mental block, but the considerations they have is how do I gain an understanding of my infrastructure and application sprawl to leverage cloud services? And so a lot of that is trying to determine what you have today and how do those align to Azure services, whether it's just replicating VMs or leveraging the platform services for specific applications, or even, reducing infrastructure costs for your SQL platforms. You know, most customers don't want to just take what they have and then just redeploy in Azure and making sure what they have is the same. It's really moving and then making the informed decision around what does my in-state need to look like, and then how long will it take. Also, this is not an easy undertaking. How do I align this migration to timing? When do I want to be done? And sometimes it's, at a very specific decision endpoint that says my, Broadcom renewal for VMware is coming up in 9 months. That's how long I have to move. Or my refresh of my technology stack is coming due in 11 months. Can I move everything within that time, or 3 months, right? What does that timing look like to move those services, and how do I get to those decision criteria of the what and how? And then it's also the financial considerations. Moving these infrastructure services to Azure, what does that cost look like? And then it's also getting to the understanding of your infrastructure and your application sprawl. It's, I have 500 virtual machines with 75 different applications. What are the dependencies across that? And then how can I organize those applications in a way that I can move them safely and securely into Azure to new services? And then it comes down to, am I just going to rehost the VMs, or are there certain areas where I can leverage modernization, such as taking or consolidating 30 SQL servers into 2 or 3 SQL managed instances? And then what does that process and capability look like? So when it comes to migration planning, it was really around those decisions and those outcomes that we had talked about. What do I move? How do I move it? Migrating using the legacy tools, a lot of times it was a lot of Excel-based reporting that really talked about, you have X hundred or 50 VMs, and you had disk space of 100 terabyte, and what does that look like in Azure from a cost to rehost that, and then how do you reduce it? We're going to show today is how Dr. Migrate not only takes some of those initial insights, but helps you wrap all of the considerations that we had talked about, from timing to platforming to building a migration plan, into useful data that allows you to make those informed decisions. And then finally, how do you align those to Azure services? So in our example scenario that we'll walk through, it's a hypothetical company with a large infrastructure footprint. They leverage Dr. Migrate to conduct an assessment. They have over 800 virtual machines and physical servers. And in this case, we'll walk through the migration decisions that they made based on the planning tools that were available to them, and then broke things down into what a wave planning, which is, how do we move VMs over X period of time, and what's that count, and then what are the impacts across those dependencies to make sure they're successfully moved. At the end of the day, what you really want to get to in this hypothetical scenario is the ability to look at your technology infrastructure in a very organized fashion. And so one of the reports that, after you've conducted the scans, and we'll go through some of those steps, is to be able to look at your technology environment to understand your servers, the utilization of those collected servers, the modernization opportunities that you have, and potentially what is coming end of life from an OS or from your database servers that exist today. And so to be able to have this information at your fingertips not only gives you that all-up picture, but it also gives you the ability to start breaking these details down into manageable chunks to understand, where they're going to move to and what's that timing look like. So in this case, there was 700 of the 811 servers. We'll be talking about 711 Windows environments, 33 SQL environments, uh, 15 Red Hat, 52 Linux, others. And then it also looks at servers that are up routinely, as well as what they call zombie servers that have been off for a specific amount of time. So should you even consider those servers? But the ability to roll this information up to the top level really starts to bring in those insights so you can start making decisions through the process in each step. So we'll talk about it from a migration planning. Legacy assessment tools. We've used Azure Migrate and other tools on a regular basis, and the information it provided was very good. It collected information about the VMs, number of CPUs, total data storage, disks. Really the key information that allowed it to align to potential Azure costs. And what you hear a lot is, right sizing the environments. Most organizations, when they purchase, virtualization technology, they're not planning just for what they have, but for 2 and 3 year increases potentially of new applications or retiring of services and so on. And what migrating to Azure gives you the opportunity to do is to now right size those servers to the specs from CPUs and from storage and RAM that most closely aligns to how the servers are being used today. So that was an important tool, but that's all that it provided. It didn't provide information about dependencies. You still had to conduct a manual application assessment. Reports were Excel driven, focused on compute infrastructure storage only. And the benefit of leveraging a tool like Dr. Migrate is it gives you that similar information plus everything else that had to be done manually, such as how do you understand the dependencies between applications? How do you identify what is good for potential re-platforming to a PaaS service? And then it lets you build those things into waves. So being able to take the manual data that's been extracted and then start to build planning and decision making around it is the real value that's provided like a tool with Dr. Migrate. Also, under the migration planning considerations, it's really around when you start that decision that, if you meet or, decide that we want to start this type of assessment, it really goes to the collection of understanding not only the number of machines and servers that you have and what that overall infrastructure requirements are, but it also you want to understand the applications and the databases that you have, understand the cloud costs and what the scope is moving those servers, what the effort is. And that's really the big piece is how much effort, how long will it take, and what are the decisions and the key criteria that I have to evaluate to be able to make sure I can do this, conduct this migration successfully and securely. And then it's the modernization decisions. There really is, no wrong decision when it comes to migration. Moving things and just rehosting everything on VMs is fine. Making decisions to modernize certain applications or databases, that's a good decision too. What it really comes down to is what is the time that you have to make the move, and then what's the comfort level and understanding those applications to make potential changes or updates to fit those into the new services. One of the things that's been around for a while, and you'll hear us talk a little bit about it today as well, is we take customers through the 6R methodology. This has been a tried and true established process. It goes along towards, do we rehost our VMs in Azure? Do we replatform them to a PaaS service? Do we refactor the applications to reduce our virtual machine infrastructure to PaaS services in Azure? Or do we retire them? Do we really need those VMs in the environment? Retain, do we need to have some servers still sit on premise in a colo just because of certain financial or business scenarios that it makes more sense to have those applications and environments stay there? Or do we replace them? Do we use an Azure native service to replace an existing technology? For instance, if you're running CrowdStrike or another XDR platform, do we leverage an Azure native service to replace that? And then what's that impact and what's that cost savings that's aligned to that? Because at the end, when you want to be able to present a scoped plan and insights for your leadership or to make that business decision, again, having that ability where you've collected the raw data about your environment to be able to host it and position it as this is our infrastructure, and when we right size it, these are our potential cost savings. Or if we have into the support operating systems and we move those to Azure, here's our potential cost avoidance savings based on moving them to Azure. These are the number of servers that are ready to migrate as is, because there's little or no technical effort to move them. And then the zombie servers, right, where we talked about where there's servers that are just still existing because on premise, we really don't need to shut things down or get rid of them. They can be available just because it's not really costing much in terms of space or within the infrastructure. And then what's our modernization opportunities? Where's our opportunities to enhance services and go under the replace decision criteria? So the ability to roll up the transactional data into an opportunity snapshot is really key from a decision making and informed process to move servers to Azure. So a little bit about Dr. Migrate, and we won't spend a lot of time talking about how the tool works. What we're more interested in is the information that it provides and evaluates. So all up, Dr. Migrate it's a cloud migration platform that helps the planning and assessment and the execution of migrations to Azure. And the value of it, outside of just collecting the transactional data about your environment, it helps optimize and provide insights and guidance so that you can speed up your cloud transformation timelines. Having conducted and been part of a number of migrations to Azure over the years, where organizations and our delivery team spend the significant amount of time, it's not the move X to Y. It is how do we understand the technology and application environment, group things into dependencies, build the plan, identify the waves, identify the rollback opportunities to be able to move things. And collapsing that time from planning to executing is where the value that Dr. Migrate provides for those organizations. So Dr. Migrate, there's two components of it. One provides the lightweight data collection where you can do the raw scans of your servers and understand the specs, similar if you're familiar with Azure Migrate and what it does. It supports a whole different set of Windows and Linux and VMware components so you can quickly scan those environments. The value, though, lies into, and this is what we'll be walking through today, is the various reporting and dashboard capabilities that it provides and to help you make that informed decision making. It helps simplify the planning decisions. That's where some of the artificial intelligence comes into play to help drive those decisions and orchestrate the data in a way that presents the opportunity and the planning. It provides a significant mechanism to help you identify the total cost of ownership from on-premise to the cloud services. Now, what's unique about that is it does require you to, add data into the Dr. Migrate platform, which is a difference between the Azure Migrate. You can utilize and append data and add metadata around your environment in the tool itself, so you can do what if scenarios for your migration wave and your decision making platforms. It will conduct a deep application analysis, as well as break out your application's VMs into migration waves. So it's automated, risk-based migration grouping that you can ultimately, change and modify, but it helps with that heavy lifting of, I've got these X number of servers, how do we group them? That takes a lot of manual effort and time and decisions and meetings and, time that not everybody has, but it helps really facilitate that process and facilitate the conversations. So, it's around insights and planning. You can turn your infrastructure data to clear recommendations from a cost, performance, and the migration plan. So there's two ways for collecting that data. So Dr. Migrate comes really in two forms. So one is the ability to install on a jump box and conduct the scans. The second is you can use it as a software as a service. And what this slide is presenting is, what is the best path for us? And do we want to be able to leverage a host and collect the data, or do we want to leverage the SaaS service and the managed platform to collect the data? Both are the same. It's just which is the more expedient process for you to be able to start collecting that data within the environment. Yeah, Dr. Migrate is supported across a number of different platforms, VMware, vSphere, Hyper-V, physical servers, as well as IBM Cloud Kubernetes to collect data. The key assessment capabilities slightly differ between the platform type you're on today, but then it also gives you, recommended deployment considerations within the environment. It does support assessment capabilities against a broad range of operating systems, Windows, Linux distributions, Red Hat, Ubuntu, CentOS, various different versions of SQL. It will do a deep dive and assessment of your web applications, including IIS analysis, .NET frameworks, dependency mapping across those, and then business applications. So COTS, software detection, licensing analysis, integration mapping. That's the assessment capabilities that it's collecting and also allows you to, manually add to that information as well. And then some of the insights that it'll provide outside of those is, VM sizing, the Azure hybrid benefits, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then it'll point out potential modernization opportunities. So instead of hosting VMs, you can then potentially move to Azure App Services or Azure Functions for some of those functionalities and reduce your infrastructure footprint within Azure itself. Same with Linux, SQL Server. We'll talk about Azure SQL, Cosmos database replacements, manage instances, etc. So supported scenarios within the environment, again, vSphere, Hyper-V, physical Windows or Linux servers. It does also, you can use Azure Migrate integration, so it can leverage data ingestion from those tools as well. So if you've already used it to collect data, it can ingest data to help you with the secondary part of that process, which is the planning and evaluation of that data. So we've reached the point of walking through Contoso Corp, the infamous company that Microsoft has worked with for a number of years. So at a high level, after you've conducted the scan, after you've collected the infrastructure information, about your environment, it allows you to provide the high level group server inventory organized by specific categories. So we can see that for this customer, we had 811 servers. These are all of the in-scope servers across all platforms that are in an environment. Of those, 744 Windows, 30 Linux, 33 SQL servers, and it consumes about 168 terabytes of data. And 51 applications are in place across that server distribution. And as part of those migration efforts, while we do a lot of VM analysis and making sure we're scoping servers to the right specs within Azure, the applications deserve and need as much time as part of the assessment process because of integrations, dependencies between how applications work, networking requirements. So you want to be able to understand the total number of applications that are in scope for that migration and understand the dependencies across those applications as well. So once you have your big picture, then you start to narrow down in that environment that allows you to either manually add your application data into the environment, or if you're leveraging a CMDB data, you can also upload that into Dr. Migrate to assist with that breakdown. But it provides reporting and analysis across your application services and databases, the frameworks that are deployed, the types of web services and web applications that are running. Then you breaks it down into your COTS applications that are in place, and then any modern workplace opportunities as well. So as you go from VM count, server counts, now you start to winnow down into what are the types of workloads that are running across that environment. From there, you start to look at it from a cost perspective. So these are an executive level snapshot. If you look to optimize or modernize your environment and assess what this costs on premise versus if you're going to leverage Azure from a cloud hosting cost and potentially come up with savings. And then how does the current versus future state breakdown look? So if you're going to move everything from on-premise compute to infrastructure VMs in Azure, this would be your Azure cost. And note, the pricing in Azure is using right-sized Azure VMs. So if you have a 12 CPU VM and a terabyte of RAM on that machine, but based on the assessment scan, it's only using half of that, then that's what this is going to, the pricing is going to display. So it's going to say, if we right size the VM based on what it needs to adequately perform, that's going to be what the new cost looks like in Azure. We're actually going through this exercise today for another customer. It's from their VMware migration to Azure VMs. And the goal is to right size every VM. It also provides an assessment cost that if you move those applications that have the opportunity to be modernized, because not everything can, but it'll show you the cost. So instead of running the application on a virtual machine, which includes Windows or licensing costs for the OS and the infrastructure compute costs, if you leveraged a platform service like Azure Services or Azure App Services, that's what the new cost would be to be running in Azure. It aligns your storage costs to migrate that data to disks or storage accounts within the environment. It aligns your supporting services costs. So you'll notice this is a little bit higher. So storing backups, DR, networking, security, and leveraging those Azure native services, that's the Azure cost. And then it gives you the total with the potential savings. Now, the on-premises cost is derived by industry norms. It's derived by some assumptions built into the model. So this may not be representative of your current usage or costs within the environment, but it lets you update the numbers based on your actuals into the environment. So the tool is not only just a presentation layer, it is also the ability to add additional information to it. So this makes it much more relevant to your situation as necessary. So then it also looks at it from a cost distribution by treatment. So when we talked about the 6 R's, so this allows you to look at the cost. So if we're going to rehost 24 applications that exist across the 741 servers, that's what it costs on-prem. This is what it would cost in Azure with your savings. Again, following the same scenarios of right-sizing the VM, as well as looking at reserved instances, leveraging Azure hybrid benefits, which is, if you buy your licensing today, instead of leveraging a VM that has the Windows license built into it, you can leverage your existing licensing agreements. So you can just rent the compute versus the compute and the license once it's been migrated to Azure. The replacement, so it allows you to refactor all of that. And again, looks at the overall data from a different view across the decisions that you get to make about how you're going to treat those VMs in the environment. So if you look at that scenario one, which is we're going to rehost everything, which is honestly the simple of all the migration steps or processes in place, just move everything to VMs, rehost all. When you look at those costs that include the right sizing and the hybrid benefit, then you start to look at moving production servers, non-production servers, storage to be able to get to your costs within that environment. But then if you take that same data and you look at it through a modernization scenario in which you're only going to move 230 servers to VMs and then re-platform and leverage the Azure PaaS services, such as consolidating from 33 SQL servers to maybe 5 SQL servers and the rest on PaaS services, then your potential annual savings increases quite a bit within that environment. But again, this allows you to continually to modify and update your decisions and your data within the environment so you can get to the right planning and the right financial and the right migration path within the environment. So once you've inventoried your apps, once you've inventoried your servers, once you understand the migration decisions that you want to make, whether it's just rehost or modernize, and you continue through the 6R methodology, then Dr. Migrate will assess those decisions and help scope a migration plan based on those decisions. So within this environment, based on the goals that you've added into the system, it'll define a migration pathway for you. And this migration pathway could be light, it could be heavy, it could be modernization focused. And in this case, we're looking at a light modernization. So we may move some SQL servers to the PaaS services, but in most cases, for customers that have a tight deadline where everything has to move within a specific time frame, the light modernization pathway is usually the best option. It is a easier implementation path. It reduces the operational complexity, but these are the insights that the tool is providing to you and basing it on really a scale across the different characteristics of a pathway for migration. And it'll show light modernization, from ease of implementation is high, operational complexity is high, developer velocity is a little bit lower, but that's only because we're not changing the underlying infrastructure to support our applications. And then, and this is what I talked about a little bit earlier, being able to transform your infrastructure inventory into an application-centric view. And so this gives you the ability to map each workload to a hosting server and understand the dependencies between the environments. For this specific customer, we talked about the 51 applications that are installed across the 300 some servers within that environment. So now, what are those applications and how do they break down? And then how many servers do they impact? So as you continue to look at from big picture and keep narrowing down the view of the environments, this helps you understand the impacts of the decisions and the migrations and help start to move things into the planning waves that will show. So we finally get to, we made some earlier decisions about what's going to be replaced, refactored, rehosted, and now it'll actually provide that view back to you that says, based on the decisions that you've made and evaluating the application's technical components and your designated application strategy that you've chosen, this is the recommendations. So 23 applications will be rehosted, 2 will be replatformed, 19 can be replaced, 5 retired, 2 retained. Now, again, you can go back and alter your assumptions and your decisions and your applications to come up with a new plan. But just based on the decisions that we talked about with light modernization, we may replace some things with Azure native services. We want to take some of our, reduce our SQL virtual machine footprint. This is what our 6R methodology will show to us in terms of what our application footprint will look like in the new environment. So once you've made those decisions within the tool, then it'll show you, the summary of the optimization, the modernization, and service decisions and enhancements that you've made as you've gone through the planning process. So it provides a view of the outcomes that will guide then breaking up these applications into migration waves into the environment. So from an optimization, we'll be able to reduce CPUs by almost 28 to 58%. We'll be able to reduce the memory consumption that's necessary to support those applications. We'll be able to consolidate 2 servers within the environment. And then we have opportunities to enhance or strengthen our security posture to replace legacy tools with, a list of these Azure solutions and native services below. The enhance isn't necessarily what you have to do, but it gives you the options to make those decisions that says, we may want to do this. But all this is doing is taking that information, guides you through the decision-making process to come up with what my plan is going to look like to move these environments into Azure. So, how was the plan developed? Insight-driven process, analyze the current environment, identify your modernization and optimization opportunities. Now we want that migration plan that aligns with the priorities and objectives and efficiency goals that were stated initially. So it's built around the application and infrastructure scope, the goals of the app strategies that defined, our migration treatment across the 6 Rs. Now we'll be able to have that wave plan and total cost of ownership within the environment itself. So again, a lot of this is done now through the reporting of that information versus having to have daily meetings and conversations and collecting all of this in Excel sheets to be able to get to the same level of information. So now the tool will provide a migration complexity rating. So it'll look at the applications that are assessed and it'll group it by low effort, medium, high, complex, and then highly complex at the end. So this will now help us prioritize that planning and then put these things into the migration wave planning and execution. So this is the example wave plan. So again, taking all of the information that was captured, it will now provide that migration wave plan to us that talks about, here's an estimated timeline. And now in this case is 2 months. It'll have 9 migration waves consisting of 50 servers at a time within the environment. Now, this is what the system spits out. You have the ability to go back and change it. I think based on our experience of conducting these migrations, all waves and the counts of VMs and applications aren't going to be equal across the environments, but maybe those that are just rehost can move at 50, but then those that are at a different sequence level of medium and complex, you may move those smaller or group them together by the applications themselves. But that's the power of the tool, that it lets you control the inputs so that you can come up and have this plan ready and then share this across team members. So not only does it do the assessment of the data and collect the transactional data about the environments, but it guides you step through step to define and get to that wave plan, and helps you understand the costing and the different conversations that need to happen in order for you to begin the execution of those, moving those servers to Azure. And so, with that then, and I haven't checked, there may be questions, is, there's some Microsoft opportunities and funding offers that for customers that meet eligibility requirements, that through the Azure Accelerate program, that will give you a free Dr. Migrate license for 90 days. So it'll allow you to scan, start going through this assessment process, and build these types of executive level reports across your specific environment, and work with Planet to be able to help support that. It's a funded project to be able to conduct the scan of the environment and produce your asset and application inventory, rehost or modernization cost options, a preliminary wave alignment and schedule, so that you have kind of that big picture about what it takes to take your existing infrastructure footprint and what is the key decisions and processes to be able to move this from an on-prem or VMware hosted architecture environment and leverage Azure services as part of that migration effort. So feel free to reach out to Planet or your Microsoft account team for the eligibility requirements.